Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another one of our free Friday community classes right here on the YouTubes. We are talking about Astragalus today as we wrap up a month-long sit with this incredible plant spirit. So much happened in the group as we spent an entire lunar cycle learning directly from this ancient green ally, and I'm going to share with you today just the tiniest little bit of everything that came through. If you want more information about our plant spirit journeys, by the way, I will put something at the end just for you. So, Astragalus, selections from the Journey monograph. I write a big monograph of magic, medicine, folklore, etymology, botany for every one of the plants that we sit. Here's just some of the things that I found most interesting from our Astragalus monograph. So today we'll be talking a little bit about nomenclature and etymology, then some notes about botany, the medicine, the magic, and a few personal notes about the spirit of this incredible plant. Let's get started. So first, a little nomenclature and etymology. There are over 3,000 species in the Astragalus genus. We're going to talk about the family that this plant is in here in just a second. The ones that we see most consistently come up in the Materia Medica by and far would be the Astragalus membranaceus, and then Astragalus mongolicus and huanchi. All three of these species of Astragalus are the ones that are considered to be the most medicinal and the most venerated, meaning they're the ones that we have been talking about for the longest. They're the ones that have established ancestral and empirical wisdom around their magic and medicine. So if you are venturing into the wild world of working with the yellow leader, these are the three that you would want to look at. And it's more than likely that on the market or at the herb shop or from your acupuncturist or wherever, that it's the Astragalus membranaceus that you're going to find. So I always like to look at, where do the plant names come from? Like, why do we call Astragalus Astragalus, right? Because what we can generally glean from looking at etymology is what people thought about the plant or how people were connecting to a particular plant, which made them give that plant the name, or in some cases, inspired the plant to give the people their name, right? So we have a couple of different possibilities here. Both of these come from the Old Greek. The one that is like the most popular, I think this is even the one that's maybe listed in Greaves and Culpeper, is that Astragalus comes from a term that means to increase the milk that a sheep produces, right? So that's good. It makes sense because this is a tonic herb. This is a Fabaceae family plant that sheep, probably would graze on. This is a warm, sweet blood building herb, which definitely influences the production of milk in humans. I don't see why that couldn't be the same for sheep. But there's a slightly older little breadcrumb in the etymology that when I found this, I was like, this makes more sense to me, right? The Old Greek astragalos, uh, relating to specific bones in the neck. And then, of course, we have the astragalus bone in the ankle, right, which is kind of interesting. Um, and then the etymological link between the term osteo, meaning relating to a bone, and astragalo, right? They don't sound super similar to the modern ear, but etymologically they're very linked. So I think that astragalus, that particular name, and there are many, many folk names for this plant. Astragalus is not the only or the oldest by any means, right? This is the Greek version, the European version of a plant that is not native to Europe. There are certainly astragalus species throughout Europe. There are astragalus species where I live, but not this particular one. Relates to the bones, relates to the structure, the foundation, the internal skeletal system, the uprightness of the body. We'll get to that in just a second. It's very important for me to acknowledge the older, or possibly the oldest known, oldest extant ancestral name for this kind of group of plants. Again, the Astragalus membranaceus, mongolicus, huanchi. which is Wang Qi, right? And this is a poetic name from the traditional Chinese medicine system. It has many layers, many poetic meanings. Two that are really meaningful to my work with this plant, because I do work a lot with astragalus. I really love this herb. Is first that Wang Qi is an herb that nourishes. Wei Qi. Wei Qi is the effortless body of light that surrounds all beings. It's not the same as an aura. It's not the same as an energy field. Rather, it's almost like a denser membrane of light that closely follows the skin, right? It's like a form-fitting light membrane that we're all wrapped up in. And in traditional Taoist Chinese medicine, it was understood that immunity started on the outside of the body. So when the Wei Qi, that body of light, was strong and nourished, then less invading evils, less invading elemental influences like wind or cold or heat could actually get into the body and cause problems, right? That Wei Qi would act like a shield, or maybe a transformer, right? Like lessening the influence of coldness so that when it came through, it didn't actually cause a disease state. So Wang Qi poetically relates to being an herb that directly nourishes, directly informs, directly strengthens the Wei Qi. So I work with Wang Qi astragalus so much for building that foundational, essential immunity in people. This is not an immune stimulating herb, right? It doesn't kick the immune system on. Rather, it is a tonic. It is a true adaptogen tonic herb that helps strengthen a foundational, fundamental function in the body. So that's one direction. We'll get to that a little bit more in the magic section. Then we have this really beautiful poetic layer to Wang Qi, which means the yellow leader, right? Yellow because the roots have a yellow color, and leader because in the Shennong Pensao, Shennong talks about Wang Qi being the leader of all the plants, something like the guru or the initiating teacher of all the other plants. So we could say that in the Chinese Materia Medica, the Taoist Materia Medica, that Wang Qi is seen in a similar light as Una or mugwort is seen in the Anglo-Saxon Materia Medica, as a plant that either taught all of the other plants how to plant, right? How to be plants, or acts as an initiating agent that teaches the mysteries of all the plants to the person walking a plant spirit path. This is very poignant coming from somebody like Shen Nong, because it was said that he was in direct personal relationship with basically every plant that grew, right? That he journeyed with, sat with, contemplated, meditated, ingested, burned, smoked, drank every plant that he encountered, and that's how he was able to write his expansive Materia Medica, is that the plants taught him directly. So Wang Qi as yellow leader, this is really a preferred poetic term for me when I refer to this plant, because it reminds us that particular plants have this affinity for either teaching human people how to understand the green mysteries, or initiating us into those green mysteries, or acting as like catalysts or translators through which the green realm can spill over into the world of the human perspective. So I just eat that right up. Yeah, we'll talk about more aspects of this as we go. Let's talk a little bit about botany, though. So as I mentioned earlier, astragalus is a member of the Fabaceae family, or the peas and beans and legumes family. I think botanists are calling this the legumes family now, Fabaceae. Shares this family with a bunch of other plants you've heard of, like soy, chickpea, peas, beans, alfalfa, peanuts, carob, licorice, fenugreek, albizia, and the kudzu vine. Actually, alfalfa is quite close in resemblance to astragalus. I've actually had people mistake certain types of kind of wild growing alfalfa with an astragalus, so that's an interesting. Or other kinds of vetches. We do have a milk vetch where I live, which is quite close in resemblance. So within that Fabaceae legume family, there are 765 genera and over 20,000 species. I think around real close to 800 of those species are within Astragalus genus. So big family, third largest family, actually, very big family. All of the plants in this family have a few things in common. They all flower. They all create fruit, which are the beans and the peas, and they all have a compound leaf structure. So this is something that's really unique looking about these plants, which is why they can be easy to misidentify, because we don't see lots of compound leaves in herbs like this. So something to be mindful of. There's also this really cool thing. There's a bacterium called rhizobia, and they make these little nodules in the root systems of astragalus, and they have a symbiotic relationship with the plant. So astragalus allows for these bacteria to create these little nodules, these little colonized areas, and the astragalus kind of allows that to happen because the rhizobia bacteria will catch nitrogen from the air, from the atmosphere, and convert it into a fixed nitrogen that the plant can then absorb from the soil, right? So without that symbiotic relationship between plant and bacteria, this nitrogen exchange would not happen, and it would be very much hard for this plant to exist. So kind of cool. This plant, as far as we know, is native to either one or all or a generalized location of the Mongolia, Siberia, China, and Japan, the East, right? We're not really sure at this point which one of those places could be the original homeland, or if astragalus, all of those places are the homeland. That's kind of what I think. But be mindful, astragalus is an adaptogen. So we will find this plant growing and thriving in places like Mongolia and Siberia and China and Japan at high elevations, or where it's very cold, or where the seasons are very drastic, adding to the adaptogenic power of this particular plant, which is very cool. On a medicinal level, our energetics are going to be warm and sweet. Remember that whenever we see sweetness in an herb, it implies that the herb builds, right? That it strengthens. So it builds the blood. It helps with appetite. It helps us put on muscle or fat. It's a nourishing, building energy. And then, of course, warmth. These herbs come into the body with warmth, bringing warmth to a cold structure or adding warmth to systems that need that warmth. Like the lungs, for example, which we'll talk about in a second. The big classifications of astragalus, especially in modern materia medica, would be that this herb is an adaptogen and a tonic. There are certainly others. There's some pronounced diuretic effect here, some anhydrous effect here, but I don't work with this herb for those reasons, right? I have other more bioregional herbs that I would turn to for those things. So adaptogen tonic is really my focus here. We work with the roots medicinally. The entire root system can be worked with. And one thing that I like to mention, and this is really just like a teacher to student thing. Like I learned it from somebody who learned it from somebody who learned it from somebody, and we just keep talking about it, is that astragalus is so tonic that when we are in an acute phase of infection, so we have a skin infection or a cold or flu or COVID or something, we don't want to take this herb, right? So maybe you're working with astragalus as your long-term adaptogenic ally. You come down with a chronic infection, you actually take a break from this herb. You take this herb completely out of your herbal program because astragalus is so tonic that it can actually tonify the infection, right? The bacteria that you're infected with, the virus that you're infected with, can actually benefit from the presence of this herb. So when you feel sick, take a break. And I have in parentheses here energetic because I don't want you to take this literally. It doesn't mean that the Astragalus is literally going into your body and finding, bad bacteria and giving them adaptogenic power. It's more of an energetic expression that the tonic nature of this plant floods and saturates the whole body, right? So it's not, the cascade of that medicine is not really going to differentiate between your good, happy cells and those of bacteria. So this is something to be mindful of. There are so many incredible medicinal virtues that this plant brings to the table. I want to talk about just a few here. Again, the big monograph that I did as part of our Astragalus plant spirit journey has all the things in it. So first, Astragalus has the right energy to nourish the preferred atmosphere of the lungs, right? The lungs like to be warm and a little bit moist. They don't like to be cold and they don't like to be dry. So this herb already has an energetic that the lungs like. And then we add on top of that the fact that astragalus has an affinity with the lungs, that when we bring this medicine into our body, we find, and you can do this intuitively when you sit with the medicine, or again by looking at the ancestral traditions around this, we find that astragalus moves first into the lungs and then maybe into other parts of the body, usually lungs, then digestion, then blood, in my experience. So this is a really beautiful herb to add to all respiratory strengthening formulas. Again, we're not going to take astragalus when we have bronchitis, when we have COVID, when we have a sinus infection. We're not working with this herb during acute illness. Rather, somebody who maybe has some constitutional or temperamental weakness in the lungs, or maybe the lungs are the path of least resistance for illness. So every time that person gets sick, it always settles in the lungs. Or maybe they deal with a chronic disease pattern like asthma, where that's just kind of an area that needs extra love. This is really an herb I would think about. The warm, sweet energetics are not necessarily a right fit for every kind of person, every body type. But when that can work, and I'm working with somebody in clinic who, has that respiratory weakness, this is always an herb that comes to mind very, very quickly. So nourish and build the lungs. Then we have cultivate uprightness. This is really interesting because one of the first times that I did a lunar sit with this plant, sat with this plant for a full lunar cycle from new moon to new moon, I kept getting teachings from astragalus about uprightness, about sitting up straight, standing straight, allowing the body to stack appropriately, and also the uprightness or the internal gravity of our organs, that the kidneys and the liver and the stomach and the intestines all kind of are held in the body where they should go, right? We don't have to often think about the fact that all of our visceral organs go where they go and they need to stay there. Otherwise, they're in this kind of prolapsed, lax condition. So astragalus really wants everything in the body to have this uplifting, upright gravity, everything in its right place. And then I found that etymology, that little breadcrumb about this related naming to the skeletal system, to the bone. And I said, wow, that's a very interesting connection there. So when folks are working on posture, when there's a slumping, when there is weakness or a disconnect from vital force that causes somebody to collapse in on themselves, the shoulders collapse in, the head can't be held high, the person is more comfortable kind of balled up, they can't hold themselves up, they need to lean on something. It's hard for them to stand on their own comfortably. It's not that they can't, it's just very uncomfortable to stand in their power. Astragalus, absolutely astragalus. And in those cases, I may not be giving somebody a therapeutic dose. We might not be working on the therapeutic level of this plant. It might be more, a ritualized drop dose and meditation, right? Just somewhere between 3 and 9 drops of a tincture rather than 35 to 45 drops in a therapeutic dose. So something to consider. Functional immunity, again, remember the poetic name Wang Qi and its relationship to Wei Qi, that membrane of light that wraps around us that acts as a shield or a buffer or a diffusing mechanism. This is really specific to Taoist Chinese medicine, that the elements, right? The elements of earth, air, fire, and water, while they are totally natural and totally right and totally part of nature, just like we are, when they come into a body system and dominate, they become disease. They become what they would call evil or a pernicious influence. So the element of cold, there's nothing inherently evil about coldness. Cold has its place. In my compass, cold is related to the element of earth. In Chinese medicine, cold is just cold. But when coldness invades the body and dominates, suddenly the entire body system is fighting against this cold pathogenic influence that causes all kinds of problems like colds and flus, right? So establishing and strengthening that functional immunity is very important. And one thing with astragalus is this plant's ability to really defend against cold and wind in the Wei Qi. This is a warm, sweet plant. It's able to warm the Wei Qi so that as cold comes in, normally during the cold winter, right, the cold months of the year, the Wei Qi has a resource of warmness with which it can harmonize that coldness. Similarly, the sweetness, which is strengthening and solid, can take wind, and as the wind tries to enter the body, that sweet built energy can diffuse or harmonize that. So that's really how I think about this, how I meditate on these herbs. Skin, the Wei Qi is anchored in the actual physical skin, right? That membrane of light rests on the skin. And so when we see folks with really stubborn skin things that won't heal, there's not an active infection again, but the skin won't heal. It won't knit properly, or it knits and it continues to open up. I absolutely will bring astragalus in. And last but not least would be fatigue. And I really think about fatigue with astragalus for folks who they're not good breathers. They're not breathing well, and they're not extracting vital force or life energy from the air. There may be some anemia. There may be a low oxygenation of the blood. The blood can't piggyback very much oxygen, and it makes the person feel tired and sluggish and yawn all the time as the body's trying to get more oxygen. Astragalus is a fantastic ally for that. Would we want to merge this herb in a formula, in a Duyao formula or a tripartite formula with other, more stimulating herbs? Maybe. But I would say, start with astragalus first and see how the body system responds. So not a ton of directly magical lore around this plant, but we can extract from the way that this plant is talked about in Materia Medica, and then some of my own personal experiences and our collective experiences, some magical aspects, right? So we can think about Wang Qi strengthening Wei Qi, which means this is very much an herb of protection, and in fact is one of my favorite herbs of protection, because I like the idea of protection being an effortless function, right? That I just naturally exude light from my being, and in so doing, it affords me a membrane or a layer of protection. I like that it doesn't have to be necessarily works of armoring, or sword and shield work all the time, that we can think about protection in this very fundamental, quiet, effortless way, that it's just there doing what it does all the time, and minimizing how much gets through that light that emanates out from us, pushes against that and is able to get inside of us, right? So really beautiful protection. And I have found, as have many other people that I've worked with, that the astragalus root pieces act as an incredible amulet for protection. Slumping and collapsing of energy, we kind of talked about when the person is not upright, whether literally or figuratively. This is an herb that I think about. And a big thing that happens when anybody journeys, does journey work, or plant spirit work with Astragalus is they find uh, this plant has very little patience for us not standing in our power, not being connected to, again, the light comes up for this herb all the time, not being connected to the light we create in the world, our personal power, what we contribute. As a leader, as a kind of a general energy, Astragalus wants us to stand in our power, stand upright, stand tall and proud. And when we don't do that, we collapse, our breathing becomes shallow, and our immune system struggles. So all of this stuff is really beautifully wrapped in together. You can kind of grok the poetry of it all. So when we sit with Astragalus, we will be shown if there are issues. You will be shown. Trust that. So one thing I want to share with you about the spirit of Astragalus. This is a story that I tell everybody when we talk about Astragalus, which is the first time I did a month-long dedication with this plant. I did an Astragalus dyed thread, which I wrapped around my wrist 3 times and committed to sit the full 29 days of a lunar cycle with this plant, spending time every day in study and meditation and medicine work with this plant. And I had created a little spot on my altar, as I am wont to do, for Astragalus, because that's who I was sitting with right now. I have a spot carved out for Dandelion because that's who we're sitting with. And 4 nights in a row, after that first initiatory night when I set my resolve and connected to the plant spirit, I would wake up the next day to something being tipped over, something being on the ground, something being out of place. This is not a part of the house where our cat is allowed. He doesn't get in that place. He can't get in that place. And when I sat with the plant and kind of tried to figure out what was happening, because my original interpretation was like, oh, maybe this plant does not want my company. Maybe Astragalus does not want to sit with me as much as I want to sit with them. What I got was Astragalus is the leader, the yellow leader, the Wang Qi, and me asking this plant to share my altar with a bunch of other plants that I have, representations of that are part of my practice was unacceptable. So I had to move my little collection of items representing Astragalus to a different bookshelf on a yellow cloth with their own candles, and then everything was fine. It's not a righteous energy. It's not a mean-spirited energy, but Astragalus, when we sit with this plant, really wants us to listen up, sit up straight, stand in our power, pay attention, right? It is that very kind of leader, general, commanding energy. And as plant spirit people, sometimes those energies are hard for us, but I can tell you that with Astragalus and many other herbs like Astragalus, most of which, by the way, tend to be of the adaptogen sort, we are greatly rewarded when we can step into that space and really let one plant dominate and really understand, that they can feel a whole spectrum of feelings, not necessarily of the human kind, but there are sometimes feelings of jealousy or, if you're going to sit with me, not me and all your other friends. You can do 1 month with me. So I like to tell people that because I feel like it gives a good indication of some of the deeper spirit of this particular plant. But Astragalus is so magical, and there is so much beautiful material that comes out of the ancestral medicine practices in China, Japan, Mongolia, Siberia, Russia, and now in the West. So you can really get to know this plant and really explore tonic work, adaptogenic work through an herb that really exemplifies what that means. So before we wrap up, if you're interested in going deep, like I've been talking about with these plant spirits, we do monthly guided plant spirit journeys. They start the day after every new moon, different herb every time. Advanced classes, courses in green magic, case studies that we share and discuss, book club, and a really incredible community over on my Patreon. There's a link to that in the video details below. With that, thank you so much for your time. I hope you learned a few things about astragalus. Anything that stands out to you, any questions you have, or your experiences, please drop them in the comments below. I love to hear from you. And with that, blessings of peace and plenty. I'll see you next time.